Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another podcast. This is the 80s ADHD Guy with Ben Glenn, and I'm here with my weekly guest, Polina Osherov Glenn. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for working with me through the troubles with this microphone.
Well, I think you need to talk into it more. You're a little far away.
I think I'm perfectly fine.
All right. Well,
I can hear me
if I'm blasting, let me turn me down a little bit. Okay, so little technical difficulties. I've committed not to edit these, so this is going to be fun for the listener.
I'm sure they'll be fine.
Yes. Okay, so last we left off, we've been married for almost 30 years, and you are married to an ADHD individual. I was thinking about this morning. You've been married to somebody who has ADHD, but the industry that you work in, there are many, many, many people who have ADHD. In fact, this morning I am wearing some of your swag. This is Pattern.
Thank you.
And just tell the listeners a little bit about Pattern and what you do, and then I'll dive into that more.
Oh gosh, I didn't know you were gonna.
Oh boy.
Don't know that I was ready for that. Okay, so Pattern is a 501c3 nonprofit,
and that's for those of you that want to donate and you get a tax deduction.
That's right. We do appreciate donations to support our work. Our goal is to raise the awareness of and support for all kinds of creative people in Indiana.
Sure.
So part of the challenge here in Indiana is that creatives just don't get recognition and the financial support.
Sure. This is more of a sports town.
That's right. Yes.
And
yes, if only the arts were supported to the same extent that the sports are.
And the crazy thing is that we have a lot of really good artists here.
We do.
And we're not talking about just painters. So when you talk about the vast variety of creatives, talk into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I try to not use the word artist because I think it's has a way of pigeonholing what the person does.
Sure.
So creative feels more descriptive of the people that I'm talking about, but it's also a little vague. So if I was to list all the folks that fall under that category, it would be a long list. So we're talking about, for example, creative writers.
Sure.
Photographers, videographers, fashion designers, graphic designers, industrial designers, certainly performing artists, so musicians and dancers and singers and, of all kinds. Museums and heritage sites fall under the creative economy rubric. So, curators, for example, fall under that. Folks that make artisanal foods.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I love to eat.
Not quite the same.
What? No, hey, if it's a piece of artwork, I'll eat it. You ever see those people that make the cakes that look like real things? Do you think they actually taste any good?
I think so.
I don't. Have you ever seen it? Like they make it like it looks like plastic, and they
well, it's all the icing, right?
Yeah, but I mean, icing. I didn't realize it could be formed into like a moldable thing. I thought icing. I mean,
well,
you get it out of a can and you spread it on. Thank you, Betty Crocker.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, or people just take, I think, creatives and creativity and art for granted because it's all around us. You can't look around this setup here and not see it in literally everything that we're looking at. These microphones were designed by somebody who was a creative. There's obviously technical aspects to designing a microphone, but the way that it looks and feels, creativity came in and took care of that. Lego, for crying out loud. I mean,
right.
Talk about creativity in action. But Pattern's specific interest is in how to help people who are creative and want to spend their life being creative make money.
Sure.
And that's sometimes very hard, especially if you are working for yourself, if you're part of the gig economy. So if you're a designer or a photographer working for a company in a traditional industry, so like let's say you're a graphic designer for Eli Lilly.
Sure.
You're doing great. However, if you want to be a spoken word poet, not as easy to make money and a living just by doing that.
I like the way you put that. and maybe some of my listeners have not heard this, or maybe it's just me, but that gig economy. So talk about that, define that a little bit.
It's something that's relatively new, but basically it's work for hire, right? And now there's platforms. So you have platforms like...
well, Fiverr is the first one that comes to my mind.
Fiverr is one, but even like Uber, right?
Yeah.
There is an app that allows you to connect with a consumer, somebody who needs your services, and you go do the thing, and you make some portion of that.
Is that
money.
through Uber? Is that something that they extended to? Because Uber's the pick a taxi cab.
That's not a creative job. I just use it as an example of gig economy because most people are familiar and can understand that example. But
Sure.
yes, there is. What's the one where you can hire people to do a variety of different tasks? What was it called?
It started with a T, I thought. Not tenor, but those are more of your
Task
creative.
Rabbit.
That's right.
Yep.
Yep. So you need somebody to haul some dirt or lug away trash or install something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So gig economy is basically you get paid when you get a gig, which is very familiar to us because that's I work based on gigs.
That's right.
Somebody hires me to speak and go do a show, and we get to pay bills that month.
Right. So it's a little uncertain.
Yeah.
You don't know where your next check is coming from. And so a lot of creatives who choose to make their living by being commissioned to do what they do,
Sure.
A lot of times just live paycheck to paycheck, if you will, which is not a great way to live, particularly if you can't afford things like health insurance.
So Pattern comes in and tries to train these individuals to be better at the business side of it, or is it, what's the bridge that Pattern?
Well, we do a couple of things. First, we are right now just in the process of educating our community and our stakeholders about what the creative economy is and who are these creatives and what's the value that they bring. And then, yeah, for sure, there's work to be done around educating creatives how to take care of business. Because, this is where the ADD part comes in.
Well, that's where I was going to segue
That's
into
right.
that, because the interesting thing, and we know this, that ADHD and creativity are very closely linked.
Very, very
it doesn't
close.
mean that everybody's that's creative has ADHD, but in your experience, this is, you're heading into 13 or 14 years of Pattern and dealing with creatives. How often do you come across somebody like me?
Well, it's an interesting confluence of skills and talents and brain functions, right? So
Sure.
I think that creatives that don't have ADD are the ones that actually go and get jobs because
Sure.
they do well in that sort of 9-to-5 environment. Whereas folks that tend to have ADD are just not great employees because they, they're a little unreliable. They're a little flaky. They like to follow their sort of creative distractions. So
Would you call those impulses?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this desire to be creative, lots and lots of ideas. And
Yeah.
you and I have talked about that. People with ADD are just idea generators all day, every day. And,
Right.
and when you are constantly coming up with new and different and exciting ways to do the things that you see in front of you, a lot of times you don't want to stick with the program. You want to go and explore the space.
Well, I know in the last podcast we talked about when we first got married, I would get started on 10 different things and never finish them. And I can't really speak into why that was the way that it was. I mean, I think that I'm more of a finisher now,
Sure.
but I think that comes through self-awareness and then also
Well, it's because you have ADD.
sympathetic enforcer.
That's right. It's a big part of it. But yes, I am a magnet for people with ADD. But I don't know if it's me or if it's just the nature of Pattern, which is really exists to help people like that. And there's just not a lot of resources like Pattern out there. People, after a while, as you go on your creative professional journey as somebody with ADD, you do start feeling a little lonely, right? Because you don't necessarily feel like you belong in the corporate 9-to-5 environment.
Right.
And then you try to strike out on your own, and because of the inherent challenges of having ADD, you have a much harder time figuring out how to market yourself, because that's not being creative necessarily in the way that you want to be. You have a hard time keeping up with invoicing clients. I know plenty of ADDers who will make the piece of art or do the photo shoot or write a piece of music, and then it takes them 6 months to invoice the client.
Right.
Which doesn't help with the paying bills issue. And so there's just a lot of glitches that happen, and it's pretty easy to feel like you're all alone in the world, that like there's nobody to support you. So we try to do that. I mean, it's impossible, of course, to support every single creative ADDer, but we try to give tools to those that are the most ready to be educated, because I think that there's definitely a case to be made about first of all, you have to recognize that you have the challenge.
Well, how many creatives do you find that don't even realize they have ADHD?
Lots.
Lots. It is, and I can back that up with how many times you've come home and you were telling me about an individual and you're like, they are so ADD.
Yeah, and they don't even know it. And, you don't want to be cavalier about throwing around that as a diagnosis necessarily, but there's a set of characteristics that are very, very specific to the ADD brain that I see very frequently.
Well, and it's interesting because you've lived with one for 30 years.
Right.
So you kind of have a little bit of a special insight to that, but being in the industry that you're in, yeah, you see it all the time. So let's say you have somebody who has those ADHD tendencies or struggling and they haven't been diagnosed. In your role, how do you communicate that? Do you communicate that? Do you just kind of hope and pray that they figure it out?
Well, I mean, managing one ADDer.
What? Who? Me?
It's already more than I need. I think that I try not to dismiss people like that. I think it's, for somebody who's not familiar with the symptoms of ADD, it's very easy to dismiss a creative individual that has it as being flaky, incompetent, unreliable, whatever those words are, right? I think I have a measure of patience for people like that others don't. And that's a double-edged sword. I think that if I had more time, I would have more of like mentoring relationships with those people. I don't. But certainly with those individuals that I do have a relationship with, to the point where we can have a really honest conversation about me saying, hey, have you been tested? And it's actually interesting because a lot of them have been tested and they know and they've been told. It's just, then what do you do with that?
And it's interesting too, because my career opens the door for me to have lots of conversations about ADHD. It is something that we're always talking about. It doesn't have any shame connected to it at all. And then when you meet somebody who's had very similar struggles that I've had, they're not going to be open and willy-nilly about this. You just kind of pick up on it. And then if the conversation comes up, I'd be curious to find out because you are one person and you can't do it all and you kind of run the show and there's a lot of things that you have to do. But as it would relate to an ADHD individual leaning on a coach, how would you go about that? If there was somebody that you were working with, do you think a coach would benefit them or, a creative? Or do they need to have like that structure of a regular job?
I wish there was a sort of a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think a lot of it starts with how severe the ADD is.
What's the scope of severity that you've seen in your business? Can you give us, you don't have to mention names, but give us examples.
Oh my gosh, I can't. I don't know. There's just people that just chronically can't pull it together.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that, pull it together?
Well, so sometimes, if you have untreated ADHD from an early age, you're going to make some decisions as you grow into adulthood that create more complications for you. That impulse control issue of for example, marrying the wrong person.
Okay.
That's a great example. So if you end up with somebody who turns out to be the wrong partner, the trail of potential disaster that leaves behind when that relationship falls apart has all kinds of effects that don't help. And so I think what's important to explore is medication.
Okay.
But then you get into the whole health insurance thing. And if you have ADD, then you probably don't have a steady job. If you don't have a steady job, then you don't have health insurance. And if you don't have health insurance, then you probably can't afford the medications. And certainly not to experiment with medications as you know you should, because those drugs don't, there's so many of them, and you have to find the right one for you. And maybe you'll get lucky and you'll whatever the doctor prescribes starts working for you, and all of a sudden, like, you're finishing things. You're doing the stuff that you need to get done to improve your life, to improve the condition, right? But what happens if you have to keep experimenting? If you have no insurance,
right?
So there's.
Well, let me ask you this.
I see a lot of that,
and I don't remember. And this is where having you on a weekly podcast is going to help me, because I don't remember, out of all the conversations and all the podcasts I've done, if we actually touched on this. I know that there was a moment where we touched on the medication subject, and I know that my listeners, this is a hot topic. Should we medicate? Should we not medicate? And if we're going to touch on that, let's dive into that a little bit more, because you're somebody who doesn't have ADD. You're outside, observing me taking these medications. And I think that we may have mentioned it, but just to recap a little bit, when I was younger, we kind of sensed that I had ADHD, and we didn't want to do the medication thing, and for whatever reason, and I think that it was a lot of an outgrowth from all of the drug awareness assemblies I was doing at the time.
Sure.
I was always the DARE speaker, and DARE graduation, and you'd always hear about people abusing medications and different things of that nature. And then the Adderall thing, kids are selling it and all of that. And so I just kind of said, nah, I don't want to do that. And I fell into it because I was turning into the chunky chalk guy, and you got me a personal trainer. And I think we did talk about this, and it was, I thought it was Ripped Fuel, but it was hydroxycut and had the ephedra in it. And so I fell into it kind of accidentally. But I want to talk into that, because here's somebody who was very anti-medication, and now I'm in a place where I'm very open to medication. And I think that the one thing that I always say is that medication is an accommodation. It is not a fix.
Right.
And I think that needs to be really well understood, because if you're a teacher or a parent and you're like, oh, they're medicated now, they're fixed. No, it's like wearing glasses, or it's like somebody explained it as far as like insulin for, regulating your blood sugar. So bouncing it back to you, somebody who saw both sides, and right now you're living with the guy who's not medicated. Kind of. Yeah. I mean, that's we had a weird week last week because
your CBD ran out.
Yeah. So I was taking,
which is a whole other topic. I mean,
the CBD oil, or
CBD, microdosing with mushrooms. I mean, all of these remedies.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, and I think there's actually research there shows that they work.
Sure.
So there's it's even more confusing than ever now, right? Because they didn't even have CBD back when you started taking meds. So
it was. I think it was Ritalin. It was Adderall. Vyvanse was around.
Okay.
And then I think because some blood pressure things, because the ephedra, the Ripped Fuel and the hydroxycut, and I don't know if long term it had an effect on my blood pressure, but my blood pressure was out the roof from that stuff. I remember I lost all this weight, and I can remember doing a show. It was for the Fun in the Sun, and I got up and I did the art and everything, and I didn't know, because I was young and I didn't get my blood pressure checked that often, but I was drenched. I mean, my pants were soaking wet because I was just sweating so much from my heart rate being out the roof. And so they put me on that Strattera, and they say that it's not supposed to raise your blood pressure, but when you read the fine print, guess what it says? Can cause hypertension. Yeah. Read the fine print, by the way. So,
meds are, damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's trade-offs.
But I think that,
which is why I think, trying natural substances first makes more sense than signing on for
I had a
synthetic drugs. But
lunch with one of my former students who's very ADHD.
speaking of ADHD, what were you going to ask me about medications?
Well, this kind of ties into it. I was hanging out with him, and he does not take medication, but everything is all about the diet. So not only are we talking about, supplements, actual medications, but also your diet and your exercise. So all of that plays in. But you brought up the thing as far as hey, if you don't have insurance, then how do you get the medications and so what would you do if you're dealing with one of these young people that is a creative and absolutely could benefit from meds?
Well, I mean, I don't know what I would do. Some of the conversations that I've been having with bigger organizations than ours that are focused on supporting artists and creatives is that there needs to be some sort of a group plan.
Oh, sure.
That is offered to creatives that don't have insurance and meet a certain, income level criteria, right? I'm not necessarily a fan of like universal healthcare.
Yeah.
But something like that, because otherwise I'm not sure how people ever get out.
Yeah.
How they ever get a chance to create space inside their brains to do things that will help improve their lives and get them on track.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, even tying into that, if you have an ADHD coach, that costs money too.
That's right.
So how do you pay for that?
Right.
And if you had the money to pay for that, it would help you to be more productive to make the money to pay for that.
So, right.
So is it the whole
catch-22.
chicken and the egg thing or
That's
whatever?
Right. That's right. Yeah, it's definitely a very complicated topic. And again, it depends on how badly you have it.
Sure.
And how soon you start thinking about doing something about it.
Is pattern, do you guys have any idea on, are you going to implement anything like that as far as those types of services, whether it's coaching or even referrals or different things of that nature?
Not in any foreseeable future. I think that's a little outside our scope of expertise.
Might be down the road, though.
You never know, I
mean,
guess.
the amount of people that you tell me that you're around that have ADD, it was like, how can you not, open yourself up to that?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Lots of challenges to address as it pertains to creatives, and especially creatives with ADD.
So being a non-ADD individual, you live with one, you work with them. How do you manage all that? How are you still sane?
I don't know. I just take it in stride, I guess. I'm not really sure. There's not any kind of a specific coping mechanism other than wanting to see people at their best and giving them some grace when they're not. And I think part of that too is letting people go. Because I think that there's definitely sometimes a risk of boundaries being crossed.
Sure, that's
in
a really
ways
good point.
that aren't really healthy. But I've always been good at boundaries. That's why we work.
She's very good at boundaries. So if somebody was listening to this and they had to work with somebody like me, and
Run.
she's not wrong. I think about my 3 years at the church, and it was funny. I was driving home today because I went there this morning and I got to see Greg, which was great. And I don't know why this jumped into my head, but I was wondering, what do people say about me when I'm not around? Because everybody has people
you
that
probably don't want to know.
No, and it was funny. I was having this. You want to talk about an ADD dialogue? Like I'm literally talking to myself in the car about this. I left and said hi to a million people because I used to work there, and then I thought to myself, I wonder what people say about me when I'm not around. And then I'm like, well, does that really matter? And I'm telling them, does that really matter, Ben? And I'm like, well, my ego cares. And then I'm like, well, my ego shouldn't care. So this is this back and forth, but. The reason why I was thinking about that was because I was very much the ADD guy in the office. And I know that there were a handful of people that struggled with me.
Sure.
But you still have to figure out a way to work together. And so I just want you to kind of just take a moment and explore the space on, hey, how can you encourage somebody who doesn't have ADHD to work with somebody who does, so that something magical can happen? Because when we do work together, I mean, it's pretty dang awesome.
Sure. Well, I think it has to start with very explicit acknowledgement, right? Like, you have this thing, and because you have it, these negative things happen,
right,
that are impairing your ability to get projects done. However, you also have all of these positive qualities. You have a lot of energy, you're entertaining, you're gregarious, and people like you.
Gregarious? What does that mean?
Look it up. You have lots of great ideas, and when you hyper-focus, you're a superhero. You can get 10 times more done than a regular person, right? Problem is, we can't quite time your hyper-focus modes. So I think you got to lay out very clearly the upsides and the downsides. And then you have to come up with a playbook for how to... Are you on your phone?
I'm Googling it. You said...
Really, right now?
Yes, gregarious.
Right now? Oh, my gosh.
The problem is I don't know how to spell it.
Just...
Gregarious definition and meaning. The meaning of gregarious is tending to associate with others of one kind?
No.
Well, I got that wrong.
Gregarious. G-R-E-G.
I'll Google it on my own time.
Thank you. Anyway, so, for example, maybe the agreement is that you get a to-do list every day. So there's certain things that an employer can implement to help the ADD stay on track, right? Well, you have to check in. Like, here, come in the morning.
Right.
We're going to go over what you're working on today.
Sure.
If you get stuck, come back to me and tell me. At the end of the day, I want you to come back and show me the list with all the check boxes.
So let me ask you this. Back that up a little bit. First of all, the person that you're working with. So I'm the ADDer and I'm working with you.
Yep.
At the very beginning, because, you know, like I said, I'm very open about my ADD, but a lot of people aren't. They're hey, I don't want anyone to know. There's a shame thing. They kind of hide it a little bit. They mask up. So in order to have that productive relationship, at some point, it's got to come out.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, that's a great question, because I think that there are some legalities around people having to disclose that they have any kind of a condition, right? In case they're being discriminated against. And in case the manager has had so many bad experiences with ADDers that they won't hire them, right? Like, which is not right. I don't know. It just depends. If the person is performing very poorly, if the person with ADHD is performing really poorly, obviously in a work environment, there's always going to be those reviews.
Oh, right? I love the review.
Yeah, the review is great. But in the review...
Ben, what would you say you do here?
That's right. Well, that's an opportunity, because if the person with... It is ultimately on the person with ADHD to reveal that they have it.
Sure.
It's not the boss's job to take care of accommodating somebody with ADHD, especially if it's a big company. Like, you can't... They don't...
So... And this is actually very different from the way that you were brought up if you have ADHD. So what happens is somebody notices, somebody tests, somebody identifies, somebody creates accommodation, somebody advocates, usually it's your parents, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And so when you get out into the real world, and I always make this joke about how you have to figure out how to make it, because, hey, just because you're impulsive and impatient doesn't mean that Target's going to open up a special checkout line because you can't stand still and hold your crap together during the holidays. So I think that that's a very important thing. So one, if you're the employer and you're listening to this, or you're the manager or whatever that role is, again, I think that it's very much not you saying, hey, I think you have this. You have to, let them take the initiative.
Well, you certainly shouldn't say you have this. You might maybe suggest it, like, hey, here's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that you are all of these great things. However, I'm also seeing that you're not completing things. You're not punctual. You're late every day.
Right.
You know, this sounds like, have you ever been tested? I don't know. Again,
But
this
you
is not
also have
legal
to-
advice. I don't
no,
even know if you
yeah.
can say that.
Well, that's, again, everything we're saying is very much our opinion. But we've also have some experience here.
Sure.
So I think that the challenge is that you're very well informed. You're very well experienced when it comes to ADHD, and you do run a staff of a handful of people, and some of them have ADD. And so you kind of know how to do that. Then you got people that are put into leadership managerial positions and they know nothing.
Right.
And so, I guess one of my fears is, hey, if you're that ADD person, you're sitting in the review and you're getting blasted with all of this stuff and you're wanting to communicate and seek some kind of an accommodation or change. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think the best way is to start at home, right?
Right.
You don't want to start at work.
Right.
You want to try and get support at home, whether that's from
That's a
your
good point,
parents, from your partner, from your roommate, right? Your best friend. Work is like the last frontier, right? Because I will hazard a guess and say probably 90% of employers really won't care. That's not this is not their problem. If you find somebody who's a good leader and really genuinely cares and believes and sees the potential in the ADDer, they will work when they don't have to accommodate. But your best bet is starting at home.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
And we talked about this yesterday, actually, about how something becomes a habit. And I remember I told you I didn't really like the way that they use that word. Like, hey, if you do this for 30 days, that becomes a habit.
Yeah, you said that habits had a negative
habit to me is like, hey, smoking cigarettes or, binging something on Netflix or something that has a negative. Discipline to me is that thing that you do that creates the consistency.
Sure.
Because even after 30 days, if you're trying to create this discipline of going to the gym, you still don't want to go to the gym after 30 days.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I went 30 days, I'm going to wake up in day 31 and be, you know what? It's a habit now. No, I don't want to go. But I think that when you start at home and you do get that support, that can then trickle down. And part of it, too, is you got to start making your own accommodations.
Yep. Yeah, you got to ultimately, I'm a big believer in taking responsibility for yourself.
Right.
Don't wait for somebody else to come and rescue you.
Right.
Because it might not come. It might not come. So you have to own your own shit. It's as simple as that. Now, getting there, accepting that responsibility, it takes a long time and a lot of work and a lot of self-awareness. But ultimately, that's really the way that you're going to create the most successful lifestyle for yourself and find the satisfaction in life. And not feel like things are constantly falling apart. And I think and I've seen this with ADDers, right? Yeah. Because of the way that they interact with the world, the wheels come off a lot. A lot. And they think it's because like the world's out to get them.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you just don't understand what you're putting out in the world and how you're interacting and the way the decisions that you're making or how you're behaving that leads to the wheels coming off.
And this is where a podcast like this can be super helpful. This is where a coach can be super. I think that the resources are out there.
Yes, ton of resources.
Again, now we're talking about discipline.
Right.
Because building a Lego is a little bit more fun than sitting down with a coach and saying, hey, the wheels are coming off, the world's out to get me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nobody
wants to hear that.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to hear, that like, hey, yes, you have this condition, but because you haven't taken responsibility for figuring out how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Now it's your fault, which sucks, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing that was jumping around my mind when you were talking is...
Also, I just had an idea.
Oh, tell it.
Okay. I was thinking, as an ADD, it might be really hard to sit and listen to a podcast. But what if you're building Lego and listening to a podcast that's coaching you?
It's actually what I do. I have to do... Here's the funny thing is because I'm not medicated now. Well, and I don't know, because the CBD stuff actually did create a balance.
Yes. I think you are medicated. Well,
Yeah.
and we haven't even, this is a topic for another day, but we're talking about self-medication and how ADDers do that in the worst possible ways.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So anyway, sorry,
Well,
you were saying.
I do have a hard time reading more now than I ever have, and whether that's just the
You
AD
do?
I do.
What do you mean? I thought you were...
Reading comprehension is really difficult. So what I've done, again, taking ownership of my own crap, is I've got a membership on Audible, especially books like I love these guys, Dr. Hallowell and John Ratty. Those are my favorite authors when it comes to ADHD. But in this last book, I read through the very first chapter, and it took forever, and it was very, like, I don't want to say it was medical.
Yeah, it's pretty...
It's not story-based.
It's technical.
Not, yeah, it's not like a fiction. It's not like,
yeah.
who did it? And so I downloaded it on Audible, and then I got my trusty Mr. Pen, because it's, I'm highlighting everything, making it more of an interactive thing. So I'll listen to it, and I'll read it, and I'll highlight it, and man, it sticks a whole lot better. And I thought, well, because I was getting ready for Brick World, well, I'll listen to it while I'm building a leg. I couldn't do it.
Really?
No, now a podcast I can, because it's conversation and it's very different. Yeah,
you don't have to focus as much.
But when it's a book and there's really specific things that you're like, okay, I want to remember this.
Yeah,
I wouldn't remember it.
Sure.
I need to go in there and I got to highlight it, because having that tangible book that I can then flip through.
Yeah.
I know where things are at.
Well, especially if you've colored them with
exactly.
Orange.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I got orange and pink.
Yeah. There's lots of tools, and it really does help to have somebody helping you.
Yeah. It's like going to the gym.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to the gym, you've got that person that gives you that nudge, and you're in community. Nobody wants to do anything on their own. It's not fun.
Right.
But here's the thing. At the end of the day, you have to do something. Don't sit around and just be a victim. Don't sit around with the, hey, I've got ADD excuse. You are capable. The resources are out there. And here's the thing, we'll close with this. The other day I was speaking to a bunch of students, and I kind of modified this point. Originally it was just celebrate your successes, and that helps build confidence. And that's true. But I added into that, embrace your failures.
Sure.
And I think that we're so afraid of failing, and we screw up all the time. And we can even do this next week. We can do a whole podcast about how that is something that I struggle with. I've got a ton of success. I've done a lot of really cool things, but I have a hard time letting go of the little crappy things that didn't hit or didn't go all the way, or something that I gave up on. And so what that does is it creates a little bit of, PTSD or something. And so you're afraid to try something. And
Sure.
when we're talking about creating accommodations,
Yeah.
you got to get creative. And you got to try stuff with the realization that maybe half of them are going to fail.
Yep.
But you're not going to find the one that works.
Yep.
So, we've tried a lot of stuff.
I think we have a mantra that we
what's
live by.
what's our mantra?
Keep moving forward.
There it is.
Yep. Yeah, you can't quit. You can't quit. You got, if something doesn't work, keep trying. Keep trying.
There is it's funny to me, because that I say that all the time when you come and tell me that. When it comes from you.
Oh, yeah, and you're like,
yeah, it's just like,
you can't use my mantra on me. Yeah, it's funny how that works. Yeah, I hopefully this was encouraging. I know that the path to self-improvement, self-actualizations is long and hard, and because people with ADHD do benefit from being medicated, whether that's natural remedies or pharmacological ones. And because that stuff costs money, those who don't have the means, I could see them sitting and listening to this and going,
what do I do?
Yeah, I guess that's the end of the road for me. I mean, I can't.
It's not. And I'll tell you why it's not. You can start with your diet.
Diet and exercise.
And it's going to have, I mean, diet and exercise and creating disciplines as far as like putting your phone in a charger that is not in your bedroom, because I guarantee you, and I struggle with this, you're not getting enough sleep. And because of that, you wake up and you're lethargic. You wake up and you don't have the disciplines to do, the things that you need to do in order to create the routines and the structures to be successful. You're a little bit more lackadaisical with your accommodations. I am speaking from experience here.
Yeah.
Okay. So the medication is kind of, in my mind, like that thing that can kind of tip the scales.
Sure.
But it is
gives
not.
It gives you a little bit of an edge.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think that this last week with the CBD stuff, it was more, and I'm glad that it ran out and the thing didn't come, right away, because it really solidified in my mind, okay, this actually is doing something.
Right.
And I think that for a lot of ADDers, because we're so like, hey, we're in the middle of doing things and I feel great. And I think you mentioned it in the last podcast, just because you're doing great doesn't mean you should stop doing what you're doing.
Right.
And that's what I did. And I think that for me though, it's nice to be able to say, okay, yeah, that's a good accommodation to add into my supplement regimen. So,
yep. I think we should definitely revisit the routines.
Sure.
As a way of helping you get control of some of your symptoms, at least initially. It's so important. This for yourself, morning is the best time to get things done.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you can commit, even if you don't have meds, if you can commit to getting a good night's sleep,
right,
getting up and working out, and it doesn't have to be anything super crazy or long, but even just going for a 20-minute, fast walk.
Yep.
And then doing the 2 or 3 most important things that will make a difference to your life in that first half of the day. And then, whatever happens after that happens. If you do that consistently for 30 days, you will see positive changes.
There's that 30 days again.
I mean, you got to give people some sort of a 30 days of consistency, whether it becomes a habit or not, will let you see change.
Yeah.
Now, can you stick with it because you have discipline or don't? Perhaps not. But you gotta have a taste of success.
Yep.
Right. And I think that a lot of times ADD symptoms make the person quit too soon.
Yeah.
And if you get to 30 days, you will see some results so that when you fall off the bandwagon, and you will, because that's just how it works.
Right.
Maybe it's a little bit easier to get back in the swing of things next time, because you will know, hey, I did it and it was really hard, but I saw forward momentum.
Why is it a bandwagon?
A story for another day,
yes.
ladies and gentlemen.
So, hey, next week, when we bring Polina back on, I don't know what episode that'll be, but let's dive into the routine. Let's dive into some more of what you do as a sympathetic enforcer. And then I'm going to come up with a couple of other questions for you.
Okay.
That would be very helpful for those of you that are listening that don't have ADHD. And then if you're listening to this and you want to ask Polina some questions, she is available. Yeah. Oh yeah. If you're listening, she's like waving at her neck right now. No, not me. I am slowly but surely roping her in. Thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Sure. Always a good time.
Do you need me to do the dishes or anything?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have kids for that, but they're kind of slacking.
A little bit.
Hey, thank you guys for listening. Tune into the next episode. We'll see you next time. This is Ben Glenn. And as always, love, peace, and
Lego bricks.
See, she said that with a tone. She tolerates it.
Yes.
God bless.